Здравствуйте, дамы и господа.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
За интерес к нашей сессии.
I'm very grateful for the interest you've shown in this session, and indeed a very warm welcome to the Gaidar Forum, if this is your first session today.
Интересная тема, которая
We are going to
в России
touch upon a subject
не столь активно обсуждается.
which we find very interesting, but it is not very much discussed in Russia today,
В частности,
unlike so many other countries in the world.
занимаюсь
Take me, for example. I've been in the world of business education for a long time. I've been running executive MBA and full-time MBA programs for quite some time. And still, to this very day,
специального курса.
we are not really offering a special course
Далее вопросы устойчивого
where we would discuss issues of sustainable growth, corporate and social responsibility, environmental and social responsibility. Well, the simple explanation for this is potentially that the people we are serving here, managers, businessmen, they are to a certain degree cynical folks, and they're trying to maximize shareholder value. So if we simply go out to them and tell them, wouldn't it be nice if we were all, white and fluffy and very nice to each other and very good citizens? Chances are that wouldn't be very successful, and that would even potentially undermine our executive MBA program, which happens to be quite expensive.
профессора Йоши Шефи, профессора
And the concept expounded by Professor Yossi Sheffi is with MIT, and he's head of Logistics and Transportation Center, but that's not important.
так сказать, отделение, исследовательское отделение MIT,
In
которое
fact,
занимается
despite the name,
управлением
it's a research branch of MIT that does extensive research into value chain management, supply chain management,
точка зрения, точнее, так сказать, точка зрения, которая представлена в его книжке
and the viewpoint that you can find in his book,
Balancing Green,
which is called Balancing Green, when to embrace sustainability in a business and when not to.
положение наших переводчиков. Мы перевели ее на русский язык только что.
We've just translated it into Russian, and it is easily available in all the bookstores of RANEPA. It's only become available, we have produced a translation very quickly. We've turned around in like 2 months. And it got printed right after the New Year holidays. So it's still hot from the printing press, apparently. So the way we translated it into Russian was striking the balance, a pragmatic look at corporate environmental responsibility. So this is the viewpoint which we certainly embrace. And the concept expounded by Professor Sheffi, I personally consider to be extremely promising, both in terms of assuring certain positive outcomes, which can hardly be expected when lots of young people protest against profits and in support of saving the planet. Please don't get me wrong, my heart goes out for those young people, but I don't think it's very instrumental. What instead Professor Sheffi offers is a more pragmatic approach. And I find it very interesting that such a concept can be easily discussed and delivered in business education programs usually attended by very pragmatic, very down-to-earth, not to say cynical people. Here I'd like to invite Professor Sheffi to deliver his presentation entitled The Real Inconvenient Truth. Here you go, sir.
Thank you very much, Mikhail, and good afternoon, everybody. Okay, I'll start again. Thank you very much, Mikhail. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you say good afternoon in English? Let's try it. Good afternoon. This was 3 out of 10, just grading you. Okay, so after this introduction, let me talk about the book which I called The Inconvenient Truth and some work that I've done since the book. So, okay, these are the main points that we'll cover. First of all, the idea of a supply chain, the life cycle assessment, and then we'll go over most of the items that are mentioned here, depending on time. So the first issue is that one mistake that the media and environmentalists are doing is they are pressing companies to do something. And the issue of sustainability is not a company issue, it's a supply chain issue. What do I mean by that? 2/3 of the carbon emission of most companies are in their upstream supply chain, their suppliers and their suppliers. For some products, most of the carbon footprint is in the use phase, downstream, by the customers. So looking at a company's environmental emissions is pretty much meaningless. Let me give you some examples. If you look at Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola is very proud that they reduced the use of water from 6 liters of water per liter of Coke to 3.5 liters of water per liter of Coca-Cola. That's a nice reduction, and they talk about in all their publication about 40% reduction. But if you think about the supply chain, they still use 28 liters of water per liter of Coke just to grow the sugar canes that are used in making Coca-Cola. So the reduction of a little over 2 liters is almost meaningless. If you look at companies like Microsoft and Cisco and Apple, they are considered very sustainable. Why? Because they don't make anything. They are just designing things, they are selling, they are marketing items, but they don't make anything. Most of the carbon footprint, for example, of Apple is in China. It's by Foxconn and other companies who actually make iPhones, not by Apple. Even though Apple is considered a very sustainable company, it's not. Because if you consider the supply chain, it has a huge carbon footprint. Same thing with Microsoft. Microsoft doesn't make Xboxes. It's a company called Flex that makes Xboxes, make them also in China, and on and on. So I mentioned that for some companies, it's in the use phase. So let me give you an example. We did a study at MIT on looking at all these hand dryer systems. You know, there are all kinds of ways to dry your hands. Which one is the most sustainable? Let me ask you a question, at least those who speak English, or at least those who can answer me in English. What is the first thing that you want to know if you want to do this study? We're in a school here, right? So let me give you a warning. I'm a professor. If you don't raise your hand and give me an answer, I will call on you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do it. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is, what is dry? What does it mean dry? Well, it turned out there's actually an international standard for dry hands. So how much humidity is considered dry? So we use this standard. Then the question is, how much electricity it takes to, or what's the impact of getting a wet hand to make it dry? We measured it. Then the question is, how many dry hands you can go in the life of the product? Because we want to take into account making the product. And then you want to look at the entire supply chain impact. And we actually looked at this. We look at making it from the raw material until you get it on the wall in your bathroom. And then you want to do some sensitivity analysis because it's very hard to estimate the parameters with certain accuracy. Turns out that the Dyson is the most, 80% of the time, the Dyson is the most sustainable. The problem here is that in this study, there were 30 people involved, and it took a year and a half to do all this. Extremely expensive, several $1 million just to do this study. It's very hard to actually calculate it with any accuracy. Tesco, the British supermarket, decided at one point that they are gonna put a label like this. You see the label here of how many kilograms of carbon per items on milk, on whatever product. And the idea was that consumer will choose the items that have the minimum carbon footprint, and then companies will see what consumers are doing and they'll start manufacturing them. Didn't quite work this way. First of all, it turns out, something that we knew already, it is very hard to calculate, to actually calculate the carbon footprint. And with full effort, they're spending about 40 million pounds per year. They were able to do 125 products in a year. 125 products, to give you an idea, it would have taken them 7 centuries to do the 90,000 products in Tesco. And this assumed that in 700 years, nothing will change, of course. You can start seeing why Walmart also started doing it and immediately realized it's too expensive. They cannot do it. Tesco stopped doing it immediately. As an aside, about half the people in Tesco thought that high carbon footprint is better. So they just stopped this whole experiment. So the problem when we talk about supply chain is that there's not much that you can do, what I call the limit of influence, because you have to influence suppliers to do something, and in many cases you don't even know who these suppliers are. This is a schema of a bill of material or a supply chain. And you have the original equipment manufacturers, tier 1 supplier, tier 2, tier 3. In most of the cases, you don't know who these guys are, because you have no commercial relationship with them. And even you know who these people are because you pay them. But in many cases, they would not even tell you who their suppliers are, because it's confidential. It's their competitive advantage. They don't want you to go around them and go directly to the supplier. So you don't even know who they are. You have no commercial relationship with them. And even if you do, you have very small volume with them, because you don't buy directly from them. So, and if you talk about commodities like oil, when you fill your car with gas, you actually don't know where it's coming from. You think you buy from Exxon or Mobil or whatever. It's not. It's all the same. It's all being mixed together and then sent to the gas stations. And only at the last minute, the company, it belongs to a specific company. And then, so the result, it became clear that companies know very little about the supply chain. It became very clear in the Horsemeat scandal in Europe, when many European sellers found out that they are selling actually horse meat and not beef. The beef came from Romania, 7 tiers down in the supply chain. It went through lots of places in Europe. Somebody in the middle changed the label from horse meat to beef, and then IKEA was selling horse meat, but they thought they're selling beef. So IKEA meatball were actually horse meatballs. Anyway, it doesn't matter because it's not bad for you. But it just shows how little people knew about their supply chain. And you cannot really influence. There's no easy way to influence customers. Customers do whatever they want. So, for example, most of the energy that is used in laundry is used in heating the water. It's not making the laundry detergent. It's heating the water. It's 90% of the energy. So some companies like Procter & Gamble came with cold water detergent. Good idea. The problem, nobody is using it. It has about 2% market share. And then another company came with dry shampoo. It's not a problem for me, but it's actually a disgusting material. You put it on your head and rub it, it becomes foamy, and then it's disgusting. Nobody's using it, but companies develop it. But you cannot force customers to do something that they don't want to do. That's the problem. And then there's what consumers say but don't pay. We'll talk. This is a crucial point, and we'll talk about it. The example here that in 2014, Ford was the #1 sustainable brand. Consider the #1 sustainable brand. They were talking about green cars and electric cars and all kind of cars that do not use any carbon product. In 2018, completely changed. Ford decided to stop making cars, and they are making only trucks and SUVs that are much heavier consumers of, much heavier users of carbon-based fuel. Ford tried to relax the mileage standards in the United States, and as I say, eliminated what cars. In 4 years, what changed? Well, cheap fuel is one of the things that changed, but also the preference of consumers. Consumers buy what they want to buy. It's very hard to convince them to buy what they don't want to buy. Consumers in the United States like trucks, like SUVs. That's what the companies are making. General Motors announced the same thing. So what consumers say? If you look, there are many publications of very reputable companies that do interviews and polling and try to see what consumers are saying. So here is one that says 73% of millennials are willing to pay more for sustainable products. Or this one, people will pay more for green beer. Green means sustainable, not green beer. 66% Nielsen, one of the most reputable companies in the United States, people are willing to pay more. Statistica, another, how many more people are willing to pay. This is all nonsense. It's just not true. Because when you have an interview and somebody that looks like me asks you, would you pay more for sustainable product? What do you say? Nah, I don't give a damn. No. You're going to say, of course, I'm willing to do it. So I call it, really? So we did an experiment. There were other studies like this. But when I give this talk, especially in Europe, there's always a European with some Dutch accent who gets up and gets very angry with me and say, it's not true, people are willing to pay more. Really? They don't. So we had an experiment. This is an experiment in Boston. By the way, Boston is in Massachusetts, which is the most progressive state in the United States, the most liberal democratic state in the United States. So we did the experiment when people, this is one of my students, and this is an aisle here when you see sustainable product, detergents, paper product that are made out of recycled paper, not organic. I didn't want to look at organic because people choose organic because of health reasons. So we look at only sustainable. And we look at what people are buying, and then we did some questions, we asked them something. But the important thing is that in Boston, the percentage choosing green is 99%. Across the United States, it's between 4 and 5%. Why? Why is this happening? There's something called the Akerlof Effect. George Akerlof is a Nobel laureate, used to be a professor at MIT. So he wrote a very famous paper, what happened when consumers of used cars cannot distinguish between good cars and bad cars, what we call lemon cars. These are bad cars. Well, if they cannot tell the difference, they are not going to pay more for good cars. The seller always says the car is good, but if the user cannot tell which is good, which is bad, they're not going to pay more, they're going to pay for the average. If they're going to pay for the average, the sellers of high quality cars will leave the market. because they cannot get the return on their cars. Over time, the quality will go down. The quality of the market will go down, and the market is damaged. In some sense, this is exactly what happened with corporate social responsibility. You cannot tell in the product if somebody is abusing the environment, if somebody is using child labor, if somebody is polluting the local river, some supplier is polluting. You cannot tell. It's not in the product. It's in the process. If you cannot tell, it makes sense that people are not willing to pay for it more. So what companies are doing is what I call sustainability theater or pretend sustainability, and it makes sense. So McDonald's announced that they are now stop using plastic straws. Lots of other people follow up doing this. This is really an idiotic statement. By the way, it's a technical term when I say idiotic. So I talked to them, and they said, oh, that's the only thing we can do. I said, if you really want to do something, stop selling beef. Stop selling meat. Because cars produce methane, which is 28 times more harmful to the environment than CO2. So, but they say, oh, well, we can't do this. I understand, but stop pretending. So, plastic straw constitute 0.03% of the plastic that dumped into the ocean. And the US is responsible for less than 1% of all the plastic in the ocean. So stop making plastic straw means nothing, exactly nothing, even for the plastic. Forget about the bigger environment, forget about climate change. Just for the plastic, it means nothing. But companies are doing this because we'll explain why. But the main reason is consumers are not willing to pay for something substantial, for real investment and real change. So I went to a conference in Hong Kong that was organized by the Economist, very progressive publications. And they had, water bottles, like you see out here. And there was a sign to show the commitment of reduction of plastic pollution. The economists will no longer use plastic straws. However, you cannot read it, but if you read what's on the bottle, the conference in Hong Kong, the water were flown from Wales. So they fly water from Wales, but they don't use plastic straws. That's exactly what I mean by pretend sustainability. You do the stupid little things, and you get some public relation, but you don't do anything that actually matters. I wrote to them about it and never got an answer. And companies are doing this. Procter & Gamble, you read about Ambition 2020. They don't tell you what they do now. They tell you what they intend to do after the current CEO will not be in his position anymore. It's always, if you look at the targets, they're beyond the tenure of the current CEO. General Motors, they say by 2050 there'll be 100% renewable energy. They have no idea how to do it. And there's no feasible way that they can do it, but it sounds good. I like Paribas a lot. They say sustainability is the new growth. They don't even commit to anything. They just make a statement. Sustainability is the new growth. What does it mean? What are they going to do? Turns out nothing. UPS My Choice. When you get, I don't know if they do it in Moscow, but in the United States, when somebody sends you a package from UPS, you get an email, and you can change the time and the location that you received the package. Why they did it? Because they have a commitment in the United States. If you are not at home, they'll come 3 times and deliver. So 12 years ago, they came up with the idea to save money. And they said, okay, we'll now improve customer service and save money because we can deliver it anywhere and we don't have to come 3 times to the door. So it was actually put on as a money-saving, cost reduction initiative. Now, last year, it was on the cover of their sustainability report. This is their sustainability report. That's great, I understand. But who are you kidding? You did it 12 years ago, not for sustainability. You did to cut costs. It's okay. But that's the way companies are doing this. So people say, especially people in Europe, say the government is the solution. The government should put some tough regulation, do something about it. It's the government. No. Why? Well, of course, US is out of the Paris Accord, so this US government is not going to do anything. Australia voted to repeal the Australia is burning, and yet they voted to repeal the carbon tax. The government, they had the slogan, X the tax, and the government fell. The liberal government fell, and there's a conservative government now that doesn't believe in global warming. Even in the US, in Washington State, the second most liberal state in the United States, twice carbon tax failed, the last time last year. They couldn't put in a carbon tax. And in Paris, when Macron tried to raise the price of gasoline by a little, by a few percentage, Paris was burning for several weekends. So even the government can't do anything. And of course, the government rescinded immediately the tax. So there's no carbon tax in France, which means that governments also cannot do what customers don't want to do. And of course, Volkswagen, just cheating outright. And, Volkswagen was, the cars were 4,000% above the US standard in terms of the diesel engine, polluting diesel. And then there are the dreamers who just talk. So this is my friend this is not my friend, from Sweden, running around the world, shouting at people, and this is another feel good. People feel good when you shout at them, apparently. So, and she's shouting at people. So she's invited to the World Economic Forum. I wonder, she didn't come to the Gaidar Forum yet, but she's in the World Economic Forum with the UN in all of this, shouting at people. So what? The US also has the Green New Deal that some of the new members of Congress are doing. The Green New Deal is basically, the idea is taking society to the Stone Age. Stopping driving, stopping flying, stopping heating homes, It's ridiculous. It will never happen. But just like the Swedish girl, it sounds good to some people. Look, Ocasio-Cortez said the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't do anything. Okay, the world is not going to end in 12 years. It's going to be hotter. It's not going to end. Anyway, then the question is, what about the others? While we are all talking about it, especially in Europe, but also in the US, in Japan, China keep building coal plants all the time. They are building coal power plants, a lot of them. And India forecast that will continue to produce 3/4 of its electricity for decades to come from coal, which is, of course, one of the dirtiest form of energy production. And even if we even if all of us in the developed world, if we talk about Europe, US, Japan, China, Russia, all of us will stop producing CO2 tomorrow. Not going to solve the problem. Why? I can answer it. Okay. Even if all of us will stop producing emissions, it's not going to happen. First of all, there's a lot of CO2 already in the atmosphere. But the most important thing is this. About between 50 and 80% of humanity, of the people in the world, live on less than $5 a day. For all of them, sustainability is a luxury good. They cannot afford it. So just think, if all of these people, over time, there are about 4 billion of them, over time, they will industrialize, like happened in China. They will start using air condition. They will start living in houses made of concrete, which, by the way, 5% of the emission of the world are just from concrete. They want to eat beef, they want to drive cars, and on and on and on and on. 4 billion people. Just imagine that what happened to China will now happen to all these people. China, since 1965, industrialized. And this is how the emission grow. Of course, they did it. At the same time, they basically eliminated poverty, which is amazing what they did in China. It's actually a human achievement. They took 1 billion people from bad poverty, and they basically eliminated extreme poverty. At the same time, of course, emission went up by 2,000%. Now imagine this happen to 4 times as many people. You know, China emission today is more than the US and Europe combined, and still going up. Just imagine this happen to Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America. You see what the problem is. So what we have here, you have a lot of, okay. What we have is a technical difficulty. Nothing is moving. Let's try again. Okay, guys. It's working. That's what I mean. It's working. Okay, so good. So we have slogan like planet versus profit, or people versus planet, or people versus profit. The real problem is, the real deal is actually people versus people. The problem is that there are lots of people who want clean environment, worried about climate change. I'm one of them. You all are. Everybody wants clean environment and worried about climate. Everybody who's thinking is worried about it. However, as it turns out, most people in the world may or may not be worried about it. What they want is jobs. They want affordable stuff to buy. And they want high living standards. That's what most of the people in the world want. Okay. Let's finish with what companies can and cannot do. So what companies are doing is what's called materiality assessment. They decide where to invest, what to do in terms of sustainability. This is from BASF, the largest chemical company in the world, a German company. And you see that, well, you don't see anything. You see this rating by external stakeholder and rating by BASF. First of all, it's a little strange that BASF itself is rating this, but be it as it may, they decided what they should focus on. Most companies are doing it. You understand that Coca-Cola may want to focus on water, and a chemical company may focus on hazardous material, maybe, and energy consumption. Okay, but what are the only reasons for business to act? Even people who don't believe in global warming, they have a few reasons they should do something. One of them is so-called eco-business. Some companies are in the business of creating green products. So Tesla, for example, is in the business of making, Tesla is in the business of making electric cars. Siemens is the business of making wind turbine. So these are businesses that serve the green market. That's one way. For regular company, first of all, it's eco-efficiency. If something cuts cost and save energy, do it. And companies doing it. So for example, Staples put regulators on its trucks to drive up to 80 kilometers an hour, 85 kilometers an hour. It saves gas. It cuts costs. Great. They do it. There's no reason not to do it. Then there are companies who do something to make sure that they are not being attacked by NGOs, by the media, by Greenpeace. So Nike, for example, used to be the target of such attacks when people found out that they are paying 12 cents a day for boys in Pakistan to put together soccer balls. And there was boycott, worldwide boycott. Sales went down by about 30%. They paid attention. Nobody wants to be attacked like this. So you want to do something, at least pretend. And finally, you may want to hedge. If you are one of these people who believe that young people really care more about this, and as they grow older and have some more purchasing power, they will vote with their purse, with their money, you want to hedge your bet. So companies like Clorox, which is an $8 billion company, has a $40 million brand that is just what's called Greenworks. It's cleaning products that are made from sustainable material and in sustainable processes, just to understand the chemistry, to understand the customer, to understand how to sell it. They're losing money on this, but it's a hedging strategy, basically, and it's not much money for them, so they're doing this. It's not clear that this will happen. It's not clear that young people, as they grow old, will care more about sustainability, young Swedish girls notwithstanding, because at least in the United States, there's a history of 200 years that young people are Democrats. When they become older, they become Republicans, which means when you start getting married, paying mortgage, having to send your kid to school, suddenly you care about money more than ideals. Maybe it's not going to happen today. You have to bet against history to believe that's not going to happen. In any case, I don't want to finish on a bad note, on a down note, so I'll suggest a way forward. Despite all this, despite the fact that what happens is the following. It's what's called tragedy of the commons on a planetary scale. What happens if consumers are not willing to pay? Consumers are not willing to do it, despite what they tell pollsters, despite what they tell the media. They're just not, in reality, they're not doing this. Governments cannot regulate against the wish of the citizens. So if the consumers are not willing to do it, government also cannot do anything. And companies cannot invest and substantially change their business to make a difference if consumers are not going to pay for this. So nobody can move. And at the same time, the developing world wants to industrialize, which will create a huge new set of emissions. The solution is technology. Renewable is not the solution. Renewable is, we should keep doing this because it has a little effect, has some effect, but it's not going to get us anywhere. We are almost at the end of how much we can do. And by the way, the Greens are against a lot of the renewable because, absolutely, because if you do sun power, it takes a lot of space. It takes space from agriculture. If you do wind, it kills birds, it makes noise, people don't like it, all the turbines. What we should have done is nuclear power. This is another mistake that we can absolutely, it's the fault of the environmentalists. The Greens, in Germany, for example, but everywhere else, were against nuclear power. It's a tragic mistake. The reason that they're against nuclear power, for example, some of the Democrats in the US, why they're against it? Because in 10,000 years, the nuclear waste is still there. I'm thinking, in 12 years, the world is going to end. Who cares about 10,000 years? 10,000 years, we'll find a solution. So we stopped. So Germany, for example, stopped doing this. Germany is not going to meet its Paris Accord commitment. They're 8% below. They're not going to meet their Paris Accord. Even with all the Greens and Merkel stuff, they're not going to meet it. And they're not going to meet the 2025. There's no way they're going to meet it without nuclear power, and they just cancel all the nuclear power. By the way, all the Democratic candidates in the United States say that they're going to shut down all the nuclear plants in the United States. It's going to be an environmental disaster. But it sounds good. So what's the real solution? The real solution, and I'm coming to the end here, the real solution is so-called carbon sequestration. There are methods of taking carbon from the air, the carbon that's already there. And the reason that's the only solution is because emission will keep growing. They'll keep growing because the developed world is not willing to change, really. And the developing world wants to change, but in the wrong direction. Wants to industrial, wants more. So we will have to have an industrial scale method for taking carbon out of the air, not just stop emitting. There are methods to do it, working in the laboratory. But the research on this is not well funded. It's very small and not done. And because of this, it's not done at the scale that it needs to be done. And there's no reason not to do it. There's no reason. Let me tell you something, talking to a Russian audience. In the introduction to my Russian book, I wrote that Russia can be the solution. Why Russia can be the solution? Because in the United States and in Europe, nobody can agree on anything. It's what's called messy democracies. Cannot agree on anything. So we can't do much. You see, President Trump is trying to do a lot of things. He can't do anything. However, two countries in the world, China and Russia, have the government, and it's particularly Russia. Why I'm talking about Russia? Because Russia has some of the best scientists in the world, some of the best engineers in the world, some of the best universities in the world. And China has the political possibility, if the government wants, to direct research and development into this area. So I can only hope that the Russian government will decide to do it, because I don't see too many others that have the capability, which the Russian nation does have, because of the absolutely best university, best scientists, and best engineers, and the ability to direct government research to do something. So I'll stop with this as a challenge to my Russian audience to make sure that the government does something like this. Anyway, let me stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, yes. Большое спасибо, профессор Шефи.
Thank you so much, Professor Sheffi. Although it was a little bit pessimistic, it was on a bit of a pessimistic side. You pin your hopes on Russia. Well, thank you very much. You heaped praise on us. I made a mistake at the very beginning. I have not introduced our speakers. I'm a budding moderator, so please forgive me. So we have Danica Purg, a wonderful lady, president of CEEMAN, that's an association for management development in Central Europe. Next to her, we have Mikhail Andronov, president of Rusenergosbyt, a power distribution company, a company that works in the real sector, trying to make its contribution in making our life more comfortable for living. And also Andrew Main Wilson, Chief Executive Officer of MBA. Well, that's an international association, and also head of BGA, that's a Business Graduate Association. And all of our distinguished panelists, I'm sure, have a point to make. Well, since I'm an amateur in moderating, I'm at odds, really. Should we ask questions to you, Mr. Sheffi, or should we give the floor to the other panelists, 10 minutes for each, and then we'll put questions to everyone. Which option do you like? Otherwise, we won't have time for all of the speakers, and that would be really, really bad. So, Danica, over to you.
Прошу вас.
You know, I'm a courageous lady, so I don't give up. It's very difficult. Thank you very much. Perhaps I could just, I shall talk what I know. And of course, I can give some comments on that, but I know too less. The only thing what I know is that this research or whatever, what you were talking today, I think that some scientists could show with some data that you exaggerated. Because even Generation Z, a guy in my school had a PhD out of that, and he said that this is a construct, that something like that does not exist sociologically. You know, there are many things that I think that you have sometimes discussion with competent people about that, and of course I should study and go one after the other. If I had this material before, I could perhaps a little bit challenge some of your how shall I say, statements. Thank you very much. We are both, English is not my first language, and Russian neither. So I run the association of 200 management schools and the school too, Blitz School of Management, and the association. And in that association, we are challenging many assumptions about education, especially management education, because we believe that also management schools are responsible for the situation today and for the future. And we believe that management education has to really to change the course of it, and it has to become more relevant for the future society. And one of the, not only how many articles you publish in a certain journal, but how much you and your work had, how much positive impact had on the society. And so we have also accreditation, like my colleague AMBA, they are a very prestigious international association, crediting especially. Excuse me, Danica. Use this. Yeah, I didn't see it. Thank you. It's good that you got this idea. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. You know, especially MBA, they accredit, and PhD, we accredit the schools, and we are also having Teachers Academy, to prepare professors of management for better work. And one of the very important things in this Teachers Academy is sustainable development. In fact, we call it business and society, because we see that we didn't do enough in academia to prepare the material, case studies, etc., material about best practices from which people could learn. I also established 2 years ago a World Institute for Sustainability and Ethics, together with Chinese, Indians. Now IBS is becoming also a member, the first Russian school, a German business school, Colonia Business School, and our school, where we want to make a program, a teaching program for companies to help them, because many presidents are eager to develop on another way, on a sustainable way, where the profit is not the only criteria of being successful, but they don't know. Something you know, but something you don't know. So it's good to be helped and to learn from others and to learn from the, really scientific data, proven data. We published even a book called Manifesto, where we are talking about this other course of management education. So to finish this first part of my indirect reaction would be that we are realizing in the world of management education more and more. Also in other associations, I see they are making efforts, one more successful than the other, one more action-oriented than the other. But we are all doing our best to really make change, which is not enough. I think that we should be more connected and supported by business. Here is something where really students, teachers, business have to work together, because it is for all of us. It is for all of us. You know, I was, of course, glad to hear about Coca-Cola. I got 12 years ago from president of Coca-Cola, Atlanta, the money for the chair for marketing. This was the first chair probably in Eastern Central Europe, because we don't have this phenomena like in the United States that companies are financing chairs. I was lucky enough to know the president. He was a speaker at my conference, at our conference, CEEMAN conference, which is in the meantime not only central in East Europe, but it's a global association becoming of dynamic societies, as we say, you know, emerging economies. And, you know, having the speech there, we talked, and then he was promising to make a chair. He gave a chair. And after 2 years, I gave back this chair, because I said to him, you know more about marketing than we do. So I prefer to have a chair on sustainable development. And he agreed. And now we have 10 years, a chair, you know, with employing a professor for that, and really doing a lot of research and teaching on sustainability, which is something, you know. And about talking about the water and all that, I was, of course, getting also some data how they could, of course, do better and so on. But, you know, we need really companies that not only started to talk about, but that they are really doing something, even if these steps are still minor, but it's very good. There are some events I would recommend to people to go for, like this Tallberg event every summer, and some others in Sweden, and some others where they really pay a lot of attention to sustainability, where you can meet people who are doing good in that, you know, where you can learn from the practice. I don't remember anymore the name of the company, but I remember that in Sweden I met an American entrepreneur who changed completely the production of the carpets, and he started to make old carpets in the new one. I was also, you know, and this is his business model, and it's profitable too, because business is thinking on another way than we are in academia thinking. It must be profit too, not only, you know, the dreams, how to have a good life, you know, but that is very important too. But you can do it also on another way. So I also, no, it's okay. I shall do it later. Thank you. You know, so I would say that such a cases, you know, such a cases are encouraging, and that inspired me that I connected myself in Slovenia with the eco-designer of fashion, of dresses. And I'm from that time onwards paying only a little bit for my dresses, because she is out of my old dresses making something very beautiful, you know. And even this jacket I have today on, she was 2 days ago remaking it, and, you know, I feel fine in that thing. So, and if you think how much a meter of textile is using, how much water is using, etc., then, you know, and how much you can save and how much you can contribute, I think that, you know, with what I don't agree with you. Yeah, One thing I really would like to say concerning your presentation, that it's true that not everything is so successful, but it's worthwhile trying. You know, if you say this is for nothing and this is for nothing, then you don't come anywhere. I became, yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
Let me just answer you. It's worse than nothing. It's much worse. It's not better. I'll tell you why. Because it gives company, you know what is a fig leaf? In the term? It gives company cover. If you pretend, it gives you a cover because you do something small and you can advertise that this is the solution. Instead of working on the real thing, you advertise the solution. Mm-hmm. And I would have loved to think that this makes a difference. However, I know the carpet company, it's in my book, I forget. The carpet company, by the way, did not reduce carbon footprint. They just reduce the waste, not the carbon footprint.
You see, this is typical way of your way of thinking and talking, only that or just that, you know. In the same argument I could have, but I shall not, to say it's not worth to be honest because nobody else is honest. You know, it's not like that. I think that we have to educate people to start with from little to become big. I started, and then I finish, of course. I started also in my youth, you know, I was not realizing how much water I use, how much of this, how much of that. I am now in every respect saving. Slovenia is, you know, and Ljubljana is like the green, one of the best cities in Europe, green city. We are the best in how do you say, in the making waste, you know, this waste, that waste, etc. Reducing, but also separating it on such a way, you know, that is helping to do it differently. I was listening recently to the deputy mayor of Ljubljana, who was coming with numbers what Ljubljana, the capital, is doing, and so it starts to encourage you really to contribute. So I think that if you have in thousands of students who are starting to be aware of that on different ways, it must be some impact. This is the thing that I really don't agree with you, if I am in short saying.
I actually agree with you.
Yeah, but you know, millions of people, like in China too. China is a very bad example, but they started. I am on the board of Zhejiang University, so I go pretty often there, and I'm also seeing how they are educating people and how they start to behave differently. So they make efforts, you know. And like that it starts. That's my statement.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Danica. Definitely, excuse me, очевидно, конечно,
There's no doubt. All changes start with education. First thing we need to do is raise awareness. And the more people become aware, the better the outcome will be. However, it's real corporations that then need to run with the ball. And here we have a representative of such a corporation, the president of Rusenergosbyt. Name is Mikhail Andronov, and I'm happy to give him the floor. Thank you very much. Do you have a clicker? Or do I just tell somebody to click my slides? Thank you very much. Well, this is obviously a very important subject, and I'm very grateful to Professor Shafi for, well, setting the stage by inviting us all to, you know, skeptically, critically, and very pragmatically reviewing the subject which is usually surrounded with so much highfalutin comment. So, in the same vein, I will be delivering a speech on how to make money on sustainability. Okay, you see here a person who resembles a head of a large country. And we also see a small girl here who is apparently not very fond of school. And both are actually telling us that ecology comes first, or environment comes first. Indeed, in so many countries, regulators are forcing corporations to become sustainable. It's a myth, by the way. The second myth is that governments are sort of imposing renewables on corporations, like they're offering subsidies. And naturally, somebody has to pay for those subsidies, right? But some people benefit from those subsidies while everybody else ends up paying. So I'm trying to prove here that even today, corporations can actually make money in the market for sustainability. You know, the organizers told me there would be lots and lots of theoretical disputes and clashes, but usually we try to teach our students, you know, to become good entrepreneurs and successful business managers. And that requires knowledge of how real businesses operate. So just like Professor Shaffi said, there are lots and lots of corporations already that claim that they are extremely green. You know, they're only using green electricity, for example. Well, the power industry, fortunately for us, unlike the Coca-Cola industry, is very easy to track. Like, we don't have convoluted supply chains. So, around New Year holidays, the Russian government gave us all a gift, effectively adopting a law on microgeneration, which states that any individual is free to install any generation device with a rated capacity below 15 kW. And, well, the law states that extra energy you produce, you are allowed to sell into the market, and the sales companies are in fact obliged to buy them from you at some like average market rates. And they are not even going to tax your revenues on that. Now, the state says, you know what, if you've got a solar panel or a windmill, and then say you go for a month on vacation, obviously you won't be using this electricity, you know, you will be able to get a pretty decent payback pretty quickly on this kind of investment. In any case, the state says we are not going to tax those revenues for 8 years. Another thing that has happened over the last 12 months is demand response and demand management. So everybody knows that consumption of electricity varies widely throughout the day. Obviously, during the night, very few plants operate, and most people tend to sleep, so the consumption of electricity goes down. There is no magic here. We still don't really know how to properly store energy, except for several power plants that are equipped for this purpose, and Duracell batteries. So, we do have some power plants that run around the clock, but some other plants, you know, they will be working like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and others will actually be working just a couple of hours per day. This is something I'm trying to demonstrate here. Now, this is a chart showing what was happening in the Moscow, like this is called first price region, but it's effectively the western part of the country, in January. So you see, we actually have something like 10% of power plants in this country which actually operate for like an hour per day. Well, we still pay for it, right? As taxpayers. Like, it was our money that was used to build this plant and to pay salaries, so both capex and opex. But we still believe that ruble earned, or I'm sorry, ruble saved is just the same as a ruble earned. So savings should be an important target. And this is an important innovation here, because starting from the 1st of July, consumers have been able to get 1.4 billion rubles from the power companies, which sounds mind-boggling, particularly to Russians in this room, because power companies are notorious for not paying. Now, we are developing this program, we're offering it to our consumers, and we're inviting everybody who is interested to talk more to us. Like, we can tell you how consumers can make money in the power market easily. Now, who is doing all this? Now, naturally, this whole thing started in the United States, and Andronov was the first company to spearhead those developments. Well, since we're sitting now in RANEPA, I should mention that student campuses or university campuses are actually playing an important role in this. Because during the hours when you actually want to reduce consumption, because this whole thing works because you're managing demand, and thus you can avoid turning on marginal generators. So, you can effectively tell campuses, and this is what they do in the United States, to not use, for example, microwaves or electric kettles in such and such time slots. And this is how they're saving real money. Now, the forecast made by the Russian government states that around 8 gigawatts, which is roughly 5% of total generation in this country, can actually be replaced with, mindful or environmentally conscious behavior. Well, this way, we can avoid building new plants or retrofitting old plants. We can avoid incurring operating costs for running those marginal generators. And it's so easy to do because the supply chain is so short. Next big thing is green certificates. Now, I've already told you about things that are already available. Now, green certificates. Lots of consumers of electricity are obviously not individuals, but corporates. And here I again agree with Professor Shafi. Many corporations want to use the fact that they are consuming green electricity for marketing purposes. Well, we are seeing customers like this. We are serving, for example, producers of cars or TV sets. They want those green certificates. So together with the government, together with the Ministry of Energy, we are developing those green certificates. Obviously, they're going to be paper-based. They are going to be based on DLT, that's blockchain technology. And using them, you will be able to track electricity to its source. You will be able to verifiably claim that your electricity came from a particular windmill. So this is a work in progress. We hope we will complete it by the end of the year. And by the way, micro-generators, that's individual generators, will also be able to participate in this and, make money while at the same time feeling very good about contributing to a greener economy. So here, I would like to diverge from what Professor Shafi said and invite you all to prosper together on sustainability. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you very much, Mikhail. Isn't it interesting? Now, from what I understand, this doesn't really help us much in terms of taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, for example. But if these arguably small steps are indeed real, and I think that you seem to have convinced both Professor Shafi and Danica. Now, if these real steps do work, we obviously applaud them. Andrew, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. And would you rather I use the handheld?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, can you all hear me at the back? Yes. Very good. Okay. So, thank you very much for all the presentations so far. Mikhail, thank you for the introduction. Yossi, thank you for a lot of statistics and thought-provoking things there. This is my third presentation of the day, all different ones. And this is actually by far the most important subject. So I'm going to talk to you not so much from my experience as a director of major multinationals or CEO of an education brand, but probably as my experience as a traveller, what I've seen here and what I predict, having been to 177 of the world's 200 countries. One of the things I was always taught as a student at the Harvard Business School is if you want to engineer great change inside an organization, you need to raise the level of D. And D stands for dissatisfaction. And that once you get enough staff in a company dissatisfied with the status quo, only then will you get true transformation of a company. And it strikes me that we've got to, right across the world, from the wealthiest countries to the poorest, we've got to have the world's best ever marketing and communications campaign here to educate and raise the level of D. And my view is that audience who can most do that starts within the world's universities. It starts with us. So across these countries, I've seen huge cultural differences, obviously across 7 continents. But in my 40 years across these 177 countries, I've seen 5 common desires of human beings that are the common desires of everyone, from the most advanced nations to the poorest. And the first is the requirement for physical safety, and that means safety from wars and conflict. The second is sufficient access and security of food and water supplies. The third is the requirement for your family for safe shelter and housing. The fourth is family happiness and harmony. And the fifth, I see in almost every one, people today want to try and ensure a better, safer future for their children than they have for themselves. And it's actually very encouraging that those 5 common feelings and wants are so common across the world, because this gives us a chance here. And in terms of raising the level of dissatisfaction, the warming of our planet and all the ecological problems affect each one of these 5. People say to me, when you've finished all 200 countries, do you want to go to Mars or the moon? And I say, I don't want to go to the moon or Mars. There's nothing there. And I certainly don't want to live there. And some nonsense you hear today about going to Mars to prepare for the entire world's population to live on another planet. I'm not a physics expert. It strikes me as nonsense. We only have one home, and we need to protect it. You raised the very good point about a CEO, and as a CEO myself, not taking a decision outside the lifespan of your job. Well, one of the problems here is the world isn't going to end in 12 years' time, and it's probably not going to end in the lifespan of your children. So the level of D, the sense of urgency across all communities, is not yet quite there. So we need to educate faster about the serious nature of this, because I'm a very positive person. I believe this could finish off our planet if we don't address it by the end of the century. It's also not true, as I've discovered in my travels, that the major problems are in the highest density population countries. The problems are often starting far away. So I have a 5 key stakeholder group: consumers, businesses, educators, governments, NGOs, and media. And it's going to be a question of communicating harmoniously, if possible, across them all. And the Sustainable Development Goals, which are absolutely well laid out. This is as good a list as any I've ever seen. They are not national problems, they are global. And I'll illustrate that with 3 experiences I've had in very remote locations personally. The first is the North Pole. 2006, I went from Murmansk to the North Pole on the Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker, the Yamal. And no way did we think that 80 people going all the way on a journey was ecologically unfriendly. It didn't occur in 2006. And in my defense, then it's good to see nuclear power being supported, because this is a warship base. It's a nuclear-powered icebreaker. But when we got to the North Pole, and the Russian captain who'd spent all his time in the high Arctic said, this is the first time we've seen open water right here at 90 degrees north. That was 2006. I'm told from the Russian crews now this is far worse, and that's 90 degrees north. But no one sees it. You don't experience it, or at least consumers don't think they experience it. But this has repercussions all the way 7,000 kilometers down to the Delta and the people of Bangladesh. And if you ask those people if global warming's becoming a problem, they will very much tell you it is. 2 weeks ago, I was in Iraq, and one of the things you don't hear, although it's a UN SDG, you don't hear that one of the most ecological unfriendly problems we've got at the moment is war. Let me tell you, the destruction of war destroys homes, planets, lives. It's arguably the most destructive thing. And I visited some of the villages in northern Kurdistan, and hundreds of villages were completely destroyed by Saddam Hussein. And I went to one cemetery where 6,000 men, all the men from the villages were taken over the age of 12 and buried alive. And you think, my goodness, we've got to communicate some of this, because the cow issue is a problem, but you've got a fundamental problem. But again, it's in a remote place. They told me I was the only tourist in northern Iraq at the time. So people aren't seeing and learning from these things.
Even more in Bosnia.
And yeah, absolutely. The crisis in Bosnia, of course, during the Baltic crisis, absolutely. I left 6 hours before President Trump made his attack, and otherwise I would not have been able to go a few days later. The most isolated country in the world, the Pacific nation of Tuvalu. The whole nation is 10,000 people. They're over 1,000 kilometers from their nearest neighbor, Fiji. The country at its widest, Funafuti Atoll, is 1/2 a mile wide. The country at its narrowest is narrower than from here to the back of the room. So I was absolutely astonished to this idyllic island, to go to the end of it and see all this rubbish dumped, all this plastic and all this waste, when you have 10,000 people 1,000 kilometers from anywhere in such a small space. But again, it's not the problem for their fish stocks. Very soon this will drift all the way south and become Australia's problem or New Zealand's problem. So we need to collectively look at these things. But again, it's out of sight and out of mind. And you talk to the citizens of Tuvalu, they don't care about the rubbish, because they said, Andrew, we are sinking. We are going to be the first country in the world to disappear. What we want is a new nation home somewhere else. So suddenly one ecology problem is ignored because there's a far greater one, which is actually the survival of the whole nation. I thought it was very profound. So Yossi went into such great detail. I'm not going to be too simplistic here, but there is a win-win-win situation, which is an organization launches a social, environmentally friendly product that actually costs them less to produce than the conventional. Thirdly, as a result, the consumer pays the same or less for that product or service. That is, we've got to try through innovation and make this product creation scenario as possible as many times as you can, because it is a win-win-win. When it's not, I'm just going to quote an example here in London. So in London from April, if you own a diesel car that's more than 5 years old, which is the vast majority of diesel cars, you're in for a frightening surcharge. So that surcharge to drive into central London in a relatively new diesel car from April the 20th will cost you $31. Now this is a real problem, because I bought myself a 2014 Range Rover. It cost me a lot of my money. The government told us all to buy diesel cars. They were more friendly for the environment. They were more fuel efficient. So we all went and bought diesel cars. And now that same government is going to penalize us at $31 every day you drive into central London. Who pays? The consumer says, where does that money go? Does that $31 go into saving the environment, or does it go into government coffers for something else? So this will become a real social revolution in April in the UK, where we may see Paris-type protests in the streets of London for the first time on something ecologically. And finally, I would come back to those 5 key stakeholders. Someone's got to take responsibility to trying to bring harmony on a global basis across these 5 areas. And I believe that the science, the economy, the medical side, They all come together in the world's best universities. And I think that we should take a positive view to solve the most serious and most difficult problem on this earth. But it starts with all of us in this room. And I agree, I think Yossi's analysis, as a former manager of McDonald's earlier in life, I know how, that's where I started my career, I know how true that is. But I also agree with Danica's view that we've got to take a positive approach to this. This is the biggest issue we face, and I feel it is up to us in this room and our science and medical equivalents to solve it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished panelists have presented their opinions, so this is high time we turn it into a Q&A session. Let's start with questions to the speakers. If the time permits, I think we should be able to accommodate statements and opinions, but please let's start with questions, okay? I understand there are at least several people in attendance who wanted to make statements, but again, let's start with questions. Do we have any? Thank you. Over there. Can we get a mic over?
Thank you very much. My question goes to Professor Yossi. I'm sorry if the name is wrong. So if Russia is so large with great deposits of petroleum, which is a major source of greenhouse gases emission and global warming, and Russia is almost the largest exporter of petroleum products, excluding OPEC countries, how do you expect such an economy as Russia to invest in one of your solutions, that is carbon sequestration? And considering also that Russia is actively a proponent for incineration plants, so where they burn all this rubbish, which is also causing more emissions. So the government is in support of this, and you are putting your eggs in the basket of Russia, saying it is one of the countries that should save the world from dying in 12 years. Can't you see the kind of, I would say, contradiction or a trade-off? It is either Russia does it and does it well, or Russia exclude itself from it, because you can't eat your cake and have it. And second question is, why do you think the minimal steps like that of McDonald's and other companies, Bloomberg and others, it's useless, so it's not necessary?
Thank you very much for the two questions. Let's start with Russia. You are absolutely right. I usually, when I have longer term talk, I mention the fact that there's a contradiction here, that some of the Russian export are based on carbon, and large part of the Russian economy is based on carbon. I simply say, yeah, the chances of this government doing it are small. The chances of other government doing it are zero. The only question is between small and zero. I don't see any other government doing this, despite all the, what I call happy talk, about all the good intentions. I just don't see it happening. So I hope my governments in the, let's say in Europe, Japan, in say the somewhat more democratic parts, just cannot agree on anything. So they don't seem to be able to do it. It all starts from the fact that consumers and citizens are not willing to change. They're willing to talk about it. They're willing to listen about it, to listen to it in universities. They like the fact, and universities like to promote it, because young people still want to think that it's possible, only they don't do it. So, yes,
Isn't it a harsh reality
I don't see.
that the countries with the less amount of supply left, those where the fossil fuels are running out, are probably going to be those that are most active in this area? Sheer hard-nosed supply and demand.
Your emphasis should be on probably. You just say, this country probably want to do it. I say, probably, maybe not. So we'll see. We all base our hopes, actually, on hypotheses for the future. I'm trying to look at data. Let me ask you a question. Between 2007 and 2017, which country in the world reduced its emission more than any other country? The number one country in the world.
Norway.
You say Norway? The good guess. It's wrong, but good guess. Anybody? The country is the United States. No, the United States as a country. Not California. All of the United States. The United States reduced emission more. Why? Certainly not because of policy changes, not because of less consumption. God, no, the US, the US consumer consumes more than many others. It's because of technology change, because of the fracking, because gas became very, very cheap, and all the big industry, all the big manufacturing changed to gas instead of coal. So emission went down significantly. It gives you an idea what is the power of technology. Without changing anything in the lifestyle, without changing any of the policy, without changing any of the education, nothing was changed. Emission went down significantly.
And here
So,
you see the role of Russia.
Exactly why I come to Russia. I come to Russia because unlike the United States just happened because of technology. I wish there'll be another technological revolution. Great. If it happens, look, let me just, it's not that I don't agree with how bad the situation is and how bad it's going to become. In fact, more than all of you, my problem is that I look at the trends. Do you realize that the emissions are still going up? Emissions are still going up. Over the, to the entire world, with all the talk, we have been educating and talking about what, for 30 years, at least? And still it's going up. So you are telling me that what was done in 30 years ago, 29 years ago, 28 years ago, suddenly is going to work. Suddenly education is going to change people.
But if you don't
Maybe.
do anything, then it's even worse.
Wrong. That's exactly the wrong attitude, I think. With all the respect. How about it? With respect.
Okay,
Let me just finish. Okay. The point that I made before, when you do the little things, it prevents you from doing the real thing. You can pretend instead of do. That's my point. Anyway, I don't remember your next question. This was a good one.
Minimal steps.
Oh, we talk about minimal steps. So that's it. Minimal steps are bad for you, bad for your health. So take real steps in order to try to solve the problem and don't pretend by doing minimal steps.
You know what you forget? That
I don't forget. I know it, I
you
just
no
decide not to
no you forget that minimal is like one person, but when you have 300 million people who are educated differently, these people are becoming scientists, they become politicians, especially in management education, they become leaders, etc. So I don't see that as minimal steps. I see that as terribly important steps.
Let's agree to disagree.
Let me just take it. Because, значит, что я хочу сказать, господа, может быть, чтобы...
Now, here's what I want to say. We need some reconciliation here in the room. Both are right. We just need to define what minimum steps are. If it's a step that yields real benefits, then yes, we can start with those steps. And if there are a lot of people who are aware of it, then you've got the critical mass. And once you have it, we should see some positive outcomes, and we need to take action. But if minimum efforts, that's what's done by major corporates that just want to get rid of the pressure from NGOs, then I agree that it's wrong. Any other questions? Here's my question to Andrew Main Wilson. My name is Mikhail. I'm head of Council on Environmental Protection or Sustainable Construction. So I was confused by your arrangement with 5 components: consumers, businessmen, statesmen, media, and educators. I believe there are 3 corporate cultures in place: public, community, and the corporate culture. And by public, I mean state. So if there's an opportunity to bring together all, like a public-private partnership, if we bring all of the 3 components together, provided that we have like a sort of social contract, then we might get the only possible investment capacity of each of the corporates. So, I mean that corporations will help those territories where they operate. So there are 3 components, not 5. And my second point is that we need to put them together as part of one major corporate structure based on investment in a particular location where they operate. Do you get it now?
Thank you for your question. I mean, you're right in that you could relabel those 5 constituencies perhaps as 3 or 4 or 6. You cannot underestimate the importance of the media in a media-savvy world, and they see themselves as sitting outside, certainly outside government, certainly outside big bad corporations. So I think you'd have to add a 4th. I chose to split it into 5. Where you're right is it's going to take a Herculean effort to get all those groups together. But I think in the history of humankind, this is the most important time to get the world together. Now, you could argue that an organization like the United Nations is maybe the one organization that should pull this together. And of course, the UN has had a very checkered history in the ability of solving individual conflicts. But whether it's 3 or whether it's 4 or whether it's 5, the principle of getting and unifying those people to work together, not just as groups, but as global groups, is, in my view, absolutely crucial to finding the solution. I think it's the only way. And I think it's not until society gets a bit closer to the edge, where the problem becomes more serious, that that level of dissatisfaction will raise, where people will say, now we have to engage. I mean, it would be nice in the oil and gas industry if we could simply let economics take its toll and wait until the fossil fuels had run out. Then there would have to be renewable energy everywhere. But the problem is too many large countries have too many years' supply left, is my understanding, including Russia.
Thank you. И, наверное, последний вопрос, прошу вас.
And possibly the final question.
Actually, Food and Agriculture Organization, United Nations. I would like to ask Professor Shafi, you talked about carbon sequestration at the end of your presentation, and you referred also to the, let's say, carbon removal technologies that exist, trying to create, let's say, negative emissions. Being from MIT, how viable do you think these technologies are in the next 10 to 15 years, by when we need to achieve the 2030 goals? Thanks.
They are not viable in the next 5 years, I can tell you that. There's a lot of research around Cambridge. It's very, for strange reasons, and we're looking at some of the, points that were mentioned here. To me, and to others, it seemed the most promising and required technology because emissions keep going up regardless of what we do. I mean, I'm not saying not save energy, not do the little thing, do them, but don't mistake them for thinking that that's the solution. The solution is taking carbon out of the atmosphere. It's amazing to me how little funding is going into this research. But it's done. A big question is how much funding and effort will be there. Let me suggest that in terms of the UN or some other, if I were the Swedish Academy, I would put a new Nobel Prize just for sustainability, or 3 of them, and get corporations and get NGOs and get government to fund it in large scale and raise the profile of this type of research. So otherwise, it's not going to happen even in 10 years because the physics is quite challenging. The chemistry is challenging. You can do it in the lab. I've seen it done, but doing it at a scale to take, gigatons of carbon out of the atmosphere, we're not there yet. And it's not we are not there yet. We don't have a way to get there yet. But there's a lot of research going on, and if the world will decide to embark on a moonshot, what they call, on a big problem like this, with the required funding, with the required incentives, as I said, Nobel Prize just for this, lots of money, competition among science center and university, then we'll get there. I have no doubt that we'll get there, but that's what it will take. So let me disagree with everybody here, just because I enjoy it. So I would, instead of investing in management education, I would invest in engineering, mathematics, physics, and chemistry, because that's where the solution is. So
you are a real technocrat.
I'm not a technocrat. I'm in the business school, but I'm an engineer by training. I simply believe, look, if you wanted to go to the moon when President Kennedy said we'll go to the moon in 10 years, what did you do? Did you say, okay, let's get a lot of economists and social scientists and managers and educate them? No. You invested in engineering and technology and went to the moon.
Also in teamwork, etc. You are preparing.
Absolutely.
You are preparing. Both you have to do.
But so let's talk for every management education, you have 270 engineers. That's about the ratio that you need. So if you do this, yeah, we agree, of course. But look, I'm teaching in the management school, so don't. But
and you have mostly engineers.
What do you mean?
Why do they come engineers to your management school?
Why do you become engineers to manage? Because because of the tragedy that manager make more money than engineers. It's a tragedy. It's true.
Thank you. Спасибо. Спасибо большое, господа.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Do we have anyone from Scania? Scania? You've got a question. You want to make a point. You represent Scania, Vakhtang. You have the floor now. Limit your intervention to 2 minutes. Thank you. Well, allow me to talk in English.
My small speech. Thank you a lot. Very interesting and I would say controversial statements that were made by different speakers. I'm very impressed by all the presentations done, but I would first of all refer to Professor Sheffi, because most of the statements are provocative. Yeah, saying not least provocative. The one which is, I would say, painful is that you only showed the minor examples of companies' activities that are dealing with carbon footprint and with reduction of like tubes, ban on tubes, etc., etc. But there are a lot of experiences by big companies when they take actions which are doing a lot. And you said about the logistic cases when logistics are out of control and it's difficult to measure what is happening in carbon emissions when it has to do with logistics. But in our case, we have our own logistic transport company, which is in cooperation with universities, is calculating how much CO2 emissions are coming from our own fleets on a daily basis. And we can take the measurements showing that if you improve the efficiency of vehicles and if you make some changes in fuel, going to alternative fuels, etc., which are quite expensive, I would say. Technologies are, of course, expensive. But in the end, they give a lot of energy savings, they give a lot of fuel savings, etc. And they are not so profitable, but still our customers are ready to buy them because they are paying attention to their own carbon footprint. And if we are not active in this area, then we don't have a business. And this is the question, which is a sort of new trend that we are facing. And we have to invest in technology today just to make our business alive in the future. And the one more point which I would mention is that you said about Tesla company, which is now, of course, successful. But 10 years ago, when there was no technology development that impressive as it is today, but why this technology development became so important? Because government invested in this kind of R&Ds, government attracted incentives, but why? Just because they were worrying about the things which are happening every day, about global emissions, about the standards of and quality of life, which is becoming poor when the emissions are a lot in the cities. And we in Europe are taking steps to ban on diesel vehicles in the city centers, but also in the whole cities, like it's done in Denmark or in Norway, for example. And we see new technologies are coming which are less sort of emission damaging, the environmental damaging, but at the same time, they are giving a chance to create new business opportunities for companies. So this is a trend which is obvious, and you are absolutely right that US made a huge significant progress about reducing its carbon footprint. You say, no, in the world the carbon emission is not reducing. It is reducing in the US. But would it be the same if there was not taken steps few years ago about what would happen in the future? And same thing applies to developing countries. Yes, they are industrializing, but in the end they would come to the same situation, and they are taking steps like China is taking steps. The biggest electric vehicle market is in China at this moment. So this kind of things we still should keep into our mind and pay attention, rather than saying that no one is doing nothing or it's a very small impact of companies' activities, etc., etc. Sorry, I'm maybe a little bit aggressive, but it was really interesting. And
you're not nearly as aggressive as I intend to be right now. So, so aggressive is what makes spice of life. Let me first say that when I present anything, my objective is to try to make everybody think. That's first of all. So I think I achieved my objective. Try to question yourself. The first issue that you mentioned is that your trucks are becoming, I don't know what percentage of your fleet is now alternative energy? 10. Why not 100%?
Because just coming. It's coming.
It's been coming for a long time.
No.
Okay. It was expensive. It was expensive. I know, but it's still not 100%. Why? Because two things. First of all, economics is more important to your company than sustainability. Second thing that you mentioned is your customers are pressing you. You know why they're pressing you? Because if your customers do the real carbon accounting, your carbon emission is in their carbon. It's much easier for them to press you as the supplier than to do something yourself. They press because they don't want to do it themselves. Because if they do it themselves, they have to reduce and they have to invest. Instead, they look at the supplier and they say, you invest. It's much easier for them to do it. That's why they do it. Because they're trying to pretend to do something. So they can publish something that say, look, the price, no. The price in any manufacturing, the price of transportation is about 2%. For any large manufacturer, the price of the transportation. I don't know if you work with I know automotive industry, I know the Procter & Gamble, Unilever. What do you mean commercial vehicle segment? No, I'm talking about manufacturing. Your customers, not you. Your customers. For General Motors, I know exactly, it's 2.1% is the price of transportation. So if you reduce by 10%, it's just 10% of this 2%. It's nothing. You don't do the real thing. And it's easier for them to press you. Anyway, that's your second point was, I forget what was your second point, but was good. So, not good enough, but good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We really have a discussion, and it's very good. I have, excuse me, please. Я совершенно неопытный модератор, все время путаю.
I'm such an inexperienced moderator, always switching to a different language. So sorry. I have another request from a professor of RANEPA's Professor Sergey. Just 2 minutes. Time's running out, yeah. I've got just 2 minutes. Social responsibility only makes sense when the operations of an enterprise do not do damage to human health. Now, here's a point on technology. The world is seeing an active development of 5G. Fifth generation telecom network. So they are being deployed across the world and in Russia too. Take the US. There's a lot of resistance to 5G. Why? The fact is, the past 10 to 15 years have witnessed, according to US scientists, that 3G, 4G networks are leading to a massive increase in brain cancer, particularly with children, and to ovaries and to breast cancer, hormone dysfunction. There's a long, long list of illnesses that 3 or 4G cause. More than 200 cities in the US were up in arms. They were vocal about banning 5G. Take November. Our neighbors from Estonia mulled a bill in Parliament that would put a freeze on 5G. Europe is strongly against 5G. What about the business community? Take the head of the US Commission that controls it's called FSS. So in 2016, its former head retired, and Bloomberg correspondent, FCC, sorry, and Bloomberg had an interview with that retiring chairman of FCC. One of the questions was, okay, you're pushing for 5G very actively. Have you checked what will be the impact on health. He was pretty cynical. Since 5G gives you hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure development and stimulates business activity, then health issues are not really a concern for us. That's a hypocrite, no? That's an outrage. The US has a heated debate in the media about that. About 200 scientists from almost 50 countries signed a petition to the UN saying that a freeze should be placed on the deployment of 5G. Have you heard anything in Russian media? No, not a single word about potential health threats by 5G. Give me 30 seconds, please. Take RT, well-known TV channel. It's one of the most active in the US. Well, it's actively opposing 5G in the US to a point that, take what the Washington Post, for example. They say that they're exaggerating. It can't be that serious. So our own media have run a campaign there, but they don't do it here. Well, that's another issue, and that's an issue for Russia. Russia can do a lot. Now, what I meant is that RT operates very actively in the US, but what about Russia? It doesn't raise this issue here in Russia. Well, we need to wrap up. The conclusion is that it's a strong and serious issue, including 5G, and an impact on health. This is all extremely important, and we won't find an answer today, but I would agree with Danica Purg that raising awareness is a critical component of a future solution. Somewhere and somehow, through alliances, new technology, through financing for engineers, that issue could be solved. It is being solved, but it's a matter of time. Let's hope for the better. Let's hope that we can enjoy life on this planet and our grandchildren would be able to enjoy life on planet Earth. Thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciated you for food for thought.